What is up, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Single Player Campaign. I'm your host, Patrick Wren, and I've got some really cool stuff I want to go over with you today. Cool is subjective, but we'll get to that. Now, you might be wondering, there's a couple episodes already on the YouTube channel, and those are the reviews with Peter. And while they fall under the Single Player Campaign umbrella, they're technically their own thing. When I came up with the idea for Single Player Campaign, I wanted to go about it as if I was a radio host, right? I'm always been really impressed by the people who can handle a radio show on their own and create content without having to riff off one another. And it seemed like a fun challenge for 2021 after spending a lot of 2020 rediscovering my love for video games. I started off the year with a goal to play one game every month. And I played one in January and then didn't play any games until May. But I actually finished the year having completed 15 games, and I was really happy with that. And it gave me a lot of joy in a year that was really tough for a lot of people. So I want to continue that and bring some of those positive vibes to a new channel that people can tune into. In my opinion, the gaming community and dialogue around video games has gotten really polarized and really just not fun to be a part of. Everything is either the worst video game that's ever been made or the best video game that's ever been made. And people are sort of attaching themselves to brands and developers and franchises as if they're sports teams, similar to politics, which I'm not going to get into. But people are following these games for years and years and years. And when they come out, they're either defending them to the death or trashing them completely. And it's a really frustrating experience for someone who loves games. So I saw this as an opportunity to not vent because I want this to be positive, but to talk about what I love and the aspects of video games that I love, and to bring criticisms to games in a way that is fair, but not irrational, not targeting the people who made the video games, looking at it with positivity being the main focus. And I know that sounds really rainbows and sunshines and butterflies, but I think it can be done. And I think it's going to be a fun challenge for me in 2021. And I've upped my goal for the year to play 2 games every month, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for everyone who reaches adulthood, you'll find that at the end of a lot of days, you get home and you spend all day at work thinking about all you want to do is play video games, and you get home and instead you sit and watch someone else play video games on Twitch or stare at your phone and scroll through Reddit. So it can be challenging to actually get yourself to complete these long games that come out nowadays. But I've been really enjoying it, and I want to share that with anyone who will watch this, which right now isn't a ton of people, but that's not important. If you've been tuning into the channel, you've probably seen that there's a couple videos already up that I've done with Peter, the co-host of the Review Set channel. And while those fall under the Single Player Campaign channel, they're kind of their own thing. They're not. I wanted to focus more on a kind of radio host journey. I was always really impressed with sports hosts who had their own channel or morning routine where they didn't get to riff with someone else. And it's not easy. And I'm certainly no expert, but it seemed like a good thing to focus on for 2021 for me anyway. So that's a little bit of why I'm doing this and what to expect. I'm hoping to put out an episode every week, but that's unrealistic. There are going to be weeks where I go on vacation or just life gets in the way. So I've set my goal at 30 videos for the year. That gives me some flexibility. We'll see what actually happens. It might be more, it might be less. It certainly won't be on the same day every week, but it'll probably depend on what's going on in games. And that kind of leads me to what I want to talk about. And I'll try to touch on news that interests me, maybe like a top 5 news segment every week. I haven't really just sat down and brainstormed segment ideas yet. This first video is kind of a trial, if you will, and I have more material to work with, which I'll get into. But outside of news, I'll probably talk about what I've been playing. I'll probably do some mini reviews of games I've already beaten or games that I've recently beaten. And I don't think it'll be a similar format to what me and Peter have done, which is a little more formal and a little more focused on getting to an end point of a grade that someone can grab onto and get a feeling for what I thought about the game. I haven't exactly figured out how I want to do those many reviews though, because I feel like there's got to be some creative space out there to be fair and criticize and highlight, but not focus so much on how those points all add up into a final product or a final grade. So tune in. We'll see what we get to there. I just finished Night in the Woods on my Switch, and it was phenomenal. It's a indie game. I think came out in 2017, and if you haven't checked it out, you absolutely should. And I think that'll be my first mini review, but it's amazing and one of my favorite games that I played in the last, well, if you include all the games I played last year, it would probably rank in the top 5. But that's what I'm going to focus on today. I was trying to think of how I could review my year in gaming in a way that would be unique and fun for everyone who's involved, which might just be me. But what I did is I took the 15 games I beat, because not all of them are beatable, and I ranked them according to their Metacritic score based on the platform I played, which gives me a foundation of what the community, what the world thinks about these games. And I put all of those into a bracket. And so I'm going to first pass match up these games according to what I think about them. And I haven't done this. I haven't gone over this at all. So this is going to be a live review battle, if you will, of 15 games. And we're going to see what comes out on top. I have a general idea what the final 4 will be, but it's going to be fun to talk through. I haven't written anything down, so I might stumble, but that's kind of the fun of this whole radio host idea, right? You don't have a script, nothing to read. So as I do more of these, I'm sure I'll get better at it. I mean, it took me, I think, 5 tries so far to get this far into a single episode. So bear with me. If you've played a lot of these games and have a lot of opinions on them, that's awesome. I leave a comment. Tell me how fucking wrong I'm about to be, because I have some pretty strong opinions on some of these games that don't line up with their Metacritic scores, which is why I thought it would be fun just to see how I contrast with some of the mainstream opinions out there. And so after I go through this, and we're going to go through every round and every matchup, and some of these games got screwed by getting matched up against juggernauts, but that's just how brackets go, right? If you follow March Madness and college basketball or anything like that, it's not always fair to the 16 seed. But I'll tell you now, there's going to be some upsets, and it should be a pretty fun thing to follow along with. But after that, we're going to take this same bracket, and we're going to have a protagonist deathmatch. I want to know which protagonist from these 15 games would kill the others in a battle to be the last man standing. And if the matchups were funny and entertaining in the game review bracket, it's going to be even better in the protagonist bracket. So without further ado, let's get into my game of the year rankings, or game of the year bracket. Let's see which game comes out on top and how they compare to their Metacritic scores. So you can see on my screen now, I've brought it up in a paint screen because my effects are really top notch. Mass Effect 2 is the 1 seed. I think it had a 94 on Metacritic. I played it on PC. Last of Us Part 2 was 93. I think there were 3 games tied at 93, being Last of Us Part 2, Hades, and Witcher 3. After that, we have Animal Crossing, New Horizons, then Mass Effect, Hyper Light Drifter, Spider-Man Remastered, which I played on the PS5. I was lucky enough to get. Final Fantasy VII Remake. 10 is Firewatch, 11 is Soma, Astro's Playroom is 12, Katana Zero is 13, Pokemon Sword 14, the first game I beat this year, and then coming in at 15 is Valorant. Because we only have 15 games to work with, Mass Effect 2 gets a bye, which seems fair, seeing as it had the highest Metacritic score. So without further ado, let's get into it. Spider-Man Remastered versus Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, if you've already been to the channel, you got to watch a 2-hour diatribe between me and Peter about our thoughts on Final Fantasy VII Remake. So you probably have a pretty good feeling for how I feel about that game. But if you didn't watch it, it's a mixed bag. Final Fantasy VII Remake, I think, really leverages the nostalgia people have for this game. As someone who's literally never played a Final Fantasy game and has never... I knew nothing about this game except for Cloud. I've Sephiroth, you know, it gets thrown around. I'd occasionally heard of it, but I didn't know any of the characters. I had no idea that every Final Fantasy game is unique and individual and don't tie together. I didn't know what the gameplay would be like. I didn't know what sort of world I was getting into, what the characters would be like, what the gameplay. And I'd say the game almost was like parabolic to me. The beginning was a little slow. The middle section was really amazing, and I I was raving to Peter at like midnight when I was going through some of the segments. Wall Market being the sum of the segments, Wall Market was the highlight of the game, and then kind of crashing back down to earth in the third act or final act, final third of the game, where it decided it really wanted to focus on Sephiroth for some reason, and it didn't land for me. And I'm gonna try to keep this as spoiler free as possible. If you want a spoilery take on these games, you can catch the reviews that me and Peter will put out. We're not going to review all of these games, but we did one for Soma, and unfortunately, it didn't work out because we hadn't figured out our setup yet. But Final Fantasy VII and Firewatch are both up. But yeah, the story didn't really work for me. The characters were amazing. The music was amazing. The game is beautiful. The world is really interesting, even if it leans really hard into that industrial metallic vibe. Um, but it was fun to be there and to interact with the people. Uh, and there was a section in the middle where I really did feel like a badass as Cloud. And that's kind of the whole point, right? When you're playing one of these games, you want to feel amazingly strong. And it's possible that I just suck ass at this game. I watched a couple videos to see like what I could possibly be missing, and I think I might have been missing a lot. I mean, I was swapping characters a lot. I was using my items. I was building up my ATP and using their powers. I like had the general flow right, but I was watching someone kick ass with Tifa, and that was not my experience. So it's possible I was leaning too much onto certain aspects of the game, um, but it just got really tiresome having to whack the same couple of mobs over and over again with Cloud, because you want to play as Cloud, right? That's the whole point of the game. Like I said, I was swapping. I enjoyed playing as Barret. I enjoyed playing as Aerith. But at the end of the day, you want to be Cloud. You want to use your gigantic sword, and that playstyle wasn't really viable or enjoyable. I didn't find the magic to be particularly entertaining. The coolest parts of the combat, in my opinion, were limit breaks and summons, both of which are effectively cutscenes. So why do I enjoy them? I guess because they are the most fantastical elements of the game, and made you feel like that badass you're supposed to be, and leaned into the fantasy elements. So yeah, the combat just, and don't even get me started on the crowd control effects in this game, the sleeping, the stunning. It's awful. And you end up in a cycle where you're swapping between your four characters, reviving the last one who got down, and then swapping to the next one and healing the person who just revived the last person who got downed. And that's just not fun. It's not fun. And that's why I'm like, maybe I just suck at this game. It's entirely possible. But as someone who had no nostalgia for the game, I don't care how they implemented old systems in a cool and unique way. I don't care that they fully fleshed out some of these characters that were what 8-bit 16-bit back in the day. It doesn't matter to me. And like I said, I love the characters, but it can't lean on that. And so in the end, I ended up giving it a C plus. Highs and lows, and I don't think C plus is a bad grade. I don't. I really don't. I think most people do. I think that's kind of how reviews are now. And if anything gets less than a 9 out of 10, it's a shit game. And I hate that. I hate that. I had fun when Cloud was dancing is one of the highlights of my entire year, but it wasn't enough to make up for some of the lows for me. But that's enough about Final Fantasy. Let's get into Spider-Man. Spider-Man's fucking awesome. Talk about a game that just makes you have fun and remember how fun it is to be in a video game. Swinging around New York City is endlessly fun. There's a trophy for fast traveling, and I think it was the second to last trophy I got, the last one being a spoiler that I won't talk about. But this game is just so enjoyable. And as someone who didn't play it originally on PS4, I was a little skeptical of the new Peter, but he really grew on me and was really authentic. And his interactions with Aunt May and with Mary Jane and Miles and everyone were so awesome. And he was a kid. He was the everyday Spider-Man. What does he say in the movie? The local neighborhood Spider-Man. It really makes you feel that way, and the combat is so smooth and organic, and the way it transitions between the finisher cutscenes and dodging between people's legs and all the different powers you can get, all the suits, everything is just fun. That's what you're looking for in a video game. This game is fun, but it is not without flaws. I went for the platinum in this game. I don't usually do that. It has to be contained to pretty much just the, like, you get it naturally by doing everything. That's the only kind of platinum I'm interested in, right? Like, I'll do all the side quests, I'll go find all the stupid little items if it's reasonable. And this game is that way. But you're going to end up grinding so many crimes. And the last two mobs you fight for these crimes and these uh, bases for the mobs are awful. They're just not fun to fight against. It's a total drag checking off the last uh, like 5 to 10 crimes in every district. And that's not going to be everyone's experience. But if you are interested in completing everything, it's going to be a slog towards the end. And I've heard that they really cleaned that up in Miles Morales, and I actually just started it last night, and it appears to be the case so far. Um, but man, I was really tired of this game by the time I beat it. I didn't touch on the story. The story, it's really underrated. It's excellent, in my opinion, as far as comic book story in a video game goes. I think it's up there with Arkham Asylum. It might help that the main villain is my favorite Spider-Man villain, but I think it's more because the characters are just fun, right? It's not a grim, serious game. And sometimes you want that, but not with Spider-Man. And swinging around listening to Jonah Jameson shit on you is just fucking fun. And you need to play this game. And I can't wait to see what else comes out of Miles Morales. But if you can't tell where I'm leaning in this battle, it's going to be Spider-Man for me. I ended up giving Spider-Man a B plus, I think. I wrote up a review for each of the games I played and posted it on the Patient Gamer subreddit just because that's my favorite sub. I like participating in it. The general dialogue in that sub is really positive and fun to be a part of. Um, but yeah, I think I spent a little too much time on this battle. We're going to try to speed it up going forwards. Um, but I had a lot of opinions on those two games, as you might have gathered. All right, up next, we got Animal Crossing New Horizons and Astro's Playroom. Talk about two more games that just make you happy, right? I think Animal Crossing came out when COVID really was becoming a thing, and people were kind of down in the dumps. And everyone, I mean, there was the whole Doom versus Animal Crossing social media presence that was amazing. And I played the shit out of Animal Crossing for the first month and have not touched it since. And that's kind of how it goes with Animal Crossing, right? Either you are one of the people who continue to play it until a new one comes out and you log 1,000 hours in this game, or you blast through it for 30 to 40 hours in a month and then forget about it. And that doesn't make it bad, but there's only so much you can do in this game. And a lot of the fun and value from this game comes in the monthly, weekly updates. I don't know how often they do it. It seems more like monthly, maybe bi-monthly. But for someone like me who's trying to take a taste of a lot of different things and not hang around Animal Crossing and doesn't have the time to check in for half an hour every day, I'm not going to get the experience with that content, and that's okay. That's really okay. I'm not going to begrudge it, but it makes my memory of the game not quite as strong. It's not my favorite Animal Crossing game, but it's really excellent, and it's worth playing if you're interested in this kind of game. I doubt I'll go back to it, but good game. Astro's Playroom, perfect size. It was the first thing I played on the PS5. It's a blast. I didn't even own a PS2 or a PS1, and I was getting all touchy-feely in this game. I have these super incredibly strong memories of like being at my friend's house in the basement at 2 a.m. and playing these game systems that I don't own. And I'm sure a lot of people got that experience, or they owned it and got that experience. And it I'm not going to go back and play this game. I'm not one of the people who's clamoring for the full release made by the same developers. I'm sure it would be good, but for me, this was in a year where I was revamping my love for video games. This was kind of a perfect kick into PS5, right? It's a complete reminder of why I love video games. It touches on all these franchises that we have connections to, some more than others for me since I didn't own the earlier systems. But it's just a fun game. The music's amazing. The controls are tight. It was, like a lot of people say, kind of a tech demo for the DualSense, and I couldn't put it down. I was grinning ear to ear while playing it, and like I said, it didn't overstay its welcome. I collected everything in the game, and it was not a chore at all. It was, I think I had to go back to like 2 levels to get everything, and that was fun. That was a fun time. I didn't do any of the time trials. I'm not that guy. I'm not re-racing every time to get zero point 0.5 seconds off of my clock. I didn't do any of them. That stuff stresses me out. I'm out on that. But for this battle, I think I'm leaning Astra's Playroom. I remember it more fondly. It gave me more of the good particles in my brain, the dopamine, um, and and maybe that's because I played it more recently. But I think it's because it's just tighter, and I appreciate a tight experience. I That might end up being a theme in some of these reviews. I wouldn't say that I lean incredibly heavily towards shorter games, but for a game that like Animal Crossing that's more of a service, I it's hard to review as someone who's not continually participating in that service. And that doesn't make it good or bad, but these are my personal ratings, right? Weird how that works. I forgot that we're doing opinionated things. And that's something just to keep in mind, right? It's hard to separate opinion and review, and because people want reviews to tell them whether or not to purchase something, but it's more about finding people you align with or have similar tastes with and seeing what they think about particular games. And if I'm that person for you, that's awesome. I want to talk about games. Let's talk about games. I've got a lot of fucking strong opinions on games, but that doesn't mean a game that I'm not rating as highly as bad. You know, it's really hard to find bad video games right now. They just don't make it out into the world. I mean, I don't trawl Steam for the latest Doki Doki spinoffs, but in general, if you're getting a game from a AAA studio or an indie game that's been talked about, you're probably getting a good product. And so it really just comes down to taste. And taste is subjective, as weird as that is. But anyways, Astra's Playroom. Next up, we've got a fun one. Katana Zero versus Witcher 3. Now, I mentioned this very briefly at the end of the Firewatch review, but Katana Zero is fucking perfect. It is incredible. It was the last game I played this year. I played it while we were on vacation, and I beat it in 3 sittings, I think. It's 4 or 5 hours long. The story is weirdly emotional. The art's amazing. The way they handle the music and the level system is really interesting. And most of all, the game just has one mechanic, really. It has one mechanic that it introduces slight variances on throughout the game, but overall, it's all about getting good and learning from your mistakes. It has the Super Meat Boy element of if you die, you pretty much instantly respawn and get to try again. And this game did the opposite of overstay its welcome. I would have enjoyed a couple more hours, a couple more boss fights, some more of these amazing music tracks. There's nothing else more to say. This game is so cool, and you need to check it out. And not everyone will love it, but it's so short. You can beat it in 2 sittings. Please play this game. It's my favorite game of the year, I think. But I don't want to spoil how future matchups are going to go. Let's talk about Witcher 3. It took me 5 years to beat Witcher 3, not because it's bad. Not because it's bad. The game is so fucking good. I don't know how I want to compare it to Cyberpunk yet. I'm 33 hours into Cyberpunk. I love that game too. But I'll talk more about that when I finish Cyberpunk. Witcher 3. So I probably played the same similar amount, 30 to 40 hours over the course of the first year and a half. And then I made a fatal mistake. And a lot of players know what that fatal mistake is. That is trying to get every question mark in Skellige. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's not worth it. The treasure at the bottom of the ocean in Skellige is not fucking worth it. It completely blew me out. I was done with the game for so long. Just, get your fill, go on the treasure hunts, but stay the fuck away from all the question marks in Skellige. It will destroy your will to live. It destroyed mine. Every time I come back, I would be like in the middle of the ocean as Geralt. Like my boat's broken. enemies everywhere. I've got to use my stupid little crossbow to kill them. And I'm just like, I do not want to swim back to shore. This is so miserable. And eventually I got to the point where I just forced myself to get back and just kind of mainline the story. I had done most of the side quests, obviously, because I was at the point where I was searching out every question mark in Skellige. That usually comes after you do the quality content. Uh, but I finally got through the story. I got an ending I was happy with, and yeah, I this game has been talked to death. Right? It came out in 2015. It's some of the best storytelling in video games. One of the most beautiful worlds. Like, I think I would get back into the game every year, and every year I would be like, wow, okay, yeah, this game is still beautiful, even compared to the games that are coming out now. Like, it's a little dated. You'll see it's a little dated, but the wind sweeping in the vast valleys of this world are just gorgeous, and it's fun to get back into. And I'm actually one of the people who likes the combat of this game, not because it's particularly interesting or dynamic, but because as the game went on, I really felt a lot stronger, and that kind of marks a successful RPG for me. I struggled at parts in the beginning of the game, maybe because I wasn't sitting down and reading weaknesses of enemies and concocting the correct potion to put on my blades or decoction. But that fucking werewolf fight at the beginning, God, it was awful. But by the end, I'm slicing through everyone like a god. I'm blasting fire all over the place, and you really feel like a Witcher. And that was a success in my eyes. Ignoring all of the story elements and how amazing all of that is. Uh, that being said, it's not a perfect game. It's not. The crafting is fine. I didn't really dive too deep into the potions. The skill tree's a little weird for me, but Katana Zero is perfect. Katana Zero is the perfect game. I should go back and play it again because it's so perfect. And there's something to be said about a game that knows exactly what it is and doesn't have any way for you to waste your time and to burn out. And that may be unfair. Witcher 3 is a gigantic RPG with hundreds of hours of content and thousands of lines of dialogue, and I appreciate it for that. It is one of my favorite games of all time, but I'm just talking about in the context of last year. What games did I have the most fun playing? And I think it's fair to give Witcher a little bit of a hit because it took me 5 years to complete. And so I'm going with Katana Zero, the first major upset of the day. I guess Astro's Playroom was kind of a major upset. It was a 12-5, but now a 13-4. I doubt many people saw this matchup coming. So let's move on to the next one. Hades versus Pokemon Sword. This is not going to be a long debate. Pokemon Sword's my least favorite Pokemon game I've ever played. Um, Not even because it's bad. It's just I think a lot of people have gathered that Game Freak's kind of mailing it in at this point. Um, the open areas were cool. Music's always good in Pokemon. There's always some cool designs, but this is not a memorable game. Gigantamaxing has to be the dumbest thing that's ever been introduced into Pokemon. And that's all I have to say about it. This is the first game I beat this past year. I don't think I'll ever touch it again. It's not really a Pokemon that I'm looking forward to going back to. Yeah, Hades is incredible. I'm gonna save some of the dialogue on Hades for the next matchup because obviously Hades was a Game of the Year candidate for a lot of people this year, and I don't think I need to waste any breath talking about it over Pokemon Sword. So let's go to Soma versus Mass Effect. So like I said, Soma was actually the first game that me and Peter played through together. We've done 2 walking simulators now. I think we're going to avoid that for a little while. But Soma's actually really, really good. I think I liked it more than Firewatch, so it's a good thing they're not matched up. It's pretty fucking horrifying if you're into that kind of thing. The story is amazing. The voice acting for the character is incredible. The environments are so well made. It's got a little bit of Bioshock elements going to it. And it was hard to play. If you're a coward like I am, it's a little easier to play if you stream it for someone and have someone there with you. But there were definitely sections where I just kind of had to force myself to play. I'm not the kind of guy who can like recognize the fact that I'm playing a video game and will not get hurt. I'm more of the cowardy kind of guy who doesn't want to die with my virtual guy. Um, but the game is forgiving enough. There isn't a lot of dying. It's more about being scared and having some philosophical conversations with yourself and your radio girlfriend. Something else it shares with Firewatch. But I found the story to be really interesting and thought provoking, and there were a couple segments of the game that I'm not gonna forget, and it it really held its own. I This was the first true horror game I think I've ever played, horror, but I'm not sure if I want to go back. I it's such a shame because the story was so interesting, and I'm such a sci-fi guy, and this is definitely a sci-fi game, and like a post up, like I'm not gonna get too much into it because I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but it's a sci-fi game, and I'm a sucker for that stuff and the conversations that come out of it. But if I had to like play a sequel that I was promised was going to have as good a story, I'm not sure I would play it. I would, it would take some coaxing. I would have to be doing something like I did with Peter where we were both playing it together so that we could talk about it. It's not the kind of thing I'm just going to pick up on my own. And this is a how much fun did I have with it kind of bracket. So I'm not sure yet. We're going to see. Let's talk it out about Mass Effect. So Mass Effect was another one I've tried, picked up and put down several times because it is dated. Mass Effect is hard to play if you're going to pick up the base version with no mods. And my dad, as loving as he is, I think got me the original for Xbox. No, the first one came out for Xbox 360 first. And I didn't even know what it was. I had like heard the buzz. This was before I was really plugged in. And I tried to play it and it did not click with me back then. Uh, that's more a testament to who I was as a kid than who I am now. But like I said, trying to pick this game up now is really hard. It's the first couple of missions are a slog. The combat is awful. I saw some people saying that they like the combat the most because the guns don't run out of ammo, but there's no projectiles in this game. You all of the guns you just like point at someone and then they just start like glowing with plasma, and it is so unsatisfying. And I think people love the sniper rifle too, and the sniper rifle makes this like weird noise every time you shoot it, but there's no like satisfaction. It just kind of like pepper spraying someone from afar. I have no idea how anyone can defend the combat. I think it's the worst combat I've ever played in any game. That being said, I was a soldier. I probably made a mistake not being a biotic or a mix or something, so I could have some powers as well, because I've heard the powers are pretty overpowered. Uh-huh. Um, all that said, done shitting on Mass Effect. The story's amazing. Like, I would slog through it again just to experience the story again for the first time because it is really, really, really interesting. And the first major twist is possibly my favorite story moment of the year. Maybe, not sure. But is it enough to overcome how dog shit it is to play and the inventory management? I liked driving the Mako around the desolate planets like a million times more than I liked the combat, and I like the inventory management. This game's really about the dialogue. If you're playing Mass Effect 1 with no mods, you're playing because you want to go through the dialogue trees. And that's worth it in my opinion. I think I gave this game like a B minus or a B, because the story is that strong and the world is that cool. And if you're a sci-fi junkie like me, you're gonna want to be in it. Uh, all the music and sound effects are great. The characters are awesome, as everyone knows if you've ever heard anything about Mass Effect. Um, but man, you got to be ready for some dated gameplay mechanics if you're gonna be playing this game. God, this is a really, really hard decision because both these games shine because of their story and not because of anything else. Uh, at least in my opinion, story and environment, they're both kind of like these darker. I mean, Mass Effect's not dark, but they're environmental based sci-fi games that you're trying to get lost in. I'm trying to think which one did I enjoy more, right? Which one would I go back and play sooner? And I think the answer is Mass Effect. Like, as dog shit as some of the stuff is, it's kind of charming in that way too. Like your insane reticle bloom and guns that only overheat and just light up the enemy. Something about it is so awful, but so like growing up as a kid with video games. And for that, I think I'm going to give it a slight edge. Slight edge. I remember it just a little more fondly than I think I do Soma. Soma was more of I'm playing this to experience it. Mass Effect was more I'm playing this and I want to keep playing this. All right, next up we got an indie battle: Hyper Light Drifter versus Firewatch. I just talked so much about Firewatch. If you watch the video, you know I was a little disappointed by it. The game's beautiful. I played it on Switch, which was a colossal mistake. It runs like absolute shit on the Switch. The frame rate losses were awful. And that's not what you want with this game, right? This game is about the beautiful world and the sweeping vistas of this park that you're working in. So picking the tiny resolution, low frame rate screen was just about the worst thing I could do. It'd be like playing a competitive shooter at 10 FPS. Like, why the heck would anyone decide this? But I did because I was traveling. All that being said, the story is still touching and asks really challenging questions, and the voice acting's out of this world. The environments are still really cool. The color palette's great. The music is delightful, but just a little disappointing. And strangely enough, Hyper Light Drifter kind of falls into the exact same camp. Pretty hyped up to me by several people. Really beautiful game, more sci-fi, so up my alley. Music's amazing, but the game is mostly about its controls, right? The whole thing, there's not much of a story going on. It's all about the combat and feeling like this badass who can effectively teleport. And the controls just didn't really line up that well for me. They didn't feel as responsive as I wanted. I talked to this with Peter a little bit, but the dashes, if you don't time it just right, don't really work. And for a game that relies so heavily on these quick twitch-like movements, um, it made me enjoy it just a good amount less than I would have if it was a little tighter. And so when I'm reflecting on this game, I can't reflect on it and be like, oh, the story was really cool and I remember a lot about it. It's more these like pictures of the environments and some of the sound effects because it's really trippy and cool. But the game just was a bit of a letdown for me. And as much as Firewatch didn't quite live up to the standards that I was expecting, and I played it in the worst possible way, I think it was a better game. And Hyper Light Drifter, I feel like there was more potential to be something I fell in love with, kind of like Katana Zero. Um, but I really only the world in the east side, or the segment of the world that's to the east, was the only world that I'm like still thinking about. Everything else I'm kind of like straining to remember about, and that tells me that eh, I I think it has to lose here. So we've had almost no, we haven't had nothing but upsets. This side of the bracket's going a little more chalk, and then when we get to the final one, this isn't going to be much of this is like Hades and Pokemon Sword. Valorant's a cool game. I'm one of the people that actually loves the art style. I like the more cartoony thing. I loved Overwatch. I was so hyped for Overwatch. I got burnt out because playing competitive games is a real chore these days. Valorant is no exception, especially when you suck at it. And I suck at it. I always fancy myself to be pretty good at video games. I've never struggled too much with anything. But Valorant, oh my god. Like, if you have never played Counter-Strike or any other comparable tactical shooter, you're gonna suck at this game no matter how much Halo you've played. I I put way too many hours in this game to continue to suck as much as I suck at this game. Um, but I still think it's cool. I think it's a cool game. I love watching it competitively. If you haven't watched any competitive Valorant and you're into that kind of thing, you should, because it is so much more fun to watch than something like Overwatch. So I got out of it what I wanted to get out. I put some money into it. I shouldn't have done that. I bought one cool gun skin and I regret it. But I had fun with it. I was excited for it. The beta was like almost another event for the quarantine times to get excited about, and everyone was trying to get in, and getting in was such a cool feeling. Um, but it's Last of Us Part 2. It's Last of Us Part 2. I'm not one of the people who did not connect with the story. I think it is, I mean, it is the greatest AAA game I have ever played. Everything about it is impressive. And I don't think it's gonna run into many bumps until it hits Hades, to be honest. Oh, spoiler. All right, let's go back to the top of the bracket. Let's give Mass Effect 2 its first run for its money. It's got a good matchup here. I actually think these games are really closely matched. I talked a lot about Spider-Man Remastered. Let's talk about Mass Effect 2, because unlike Mass Effect 1, this game was actually fun to play, and that's really important in my book. I know some people complain that it's more of a action game with RPG elements than an RPG with action elements, and that works for me. That's what I want. It's more witchery, less walking simulator story, and I appreciate that. The combat encounters are actually fun in this game. The characters are just as fun and entertaining, and you fall in love with them all the same, but you're also enjoying combat, and inventory management doesn't suck ass. Exploring, I actually wish that the Mako elements were still in this game. Mining planets is such a chore. I know the shooting of the mine, or the little, I don't even know what the word is, whatever you shoot into the planets to mine the elements out, that noise rules, and I love hearing it, but I don't like doing it as an activity in a video game. And as far as story goes, compared to the first Mass Effect, I'd say this is a step down. A lot of people look at this game as a series of side quests, or like a series of filler episodes. If you're watching a TV show, it's like the side quests that eventually feed into the main story. And that's how this feels. You're acquiring your crew for the eventual end mission. So you do a bunch of not one on one, but a bunch of missions focused on each character's story, and it's cool. There's a lot of amazing characters in this game. You go to some really cool locations, and they're all fun. I don't remember any dragging particularly hard. Um, I will say that the ending I got can't be. There's no ending that's worse, right? I got the worst deaths in the whole game. I'm still mad about it. I haven't played 3. I plan to play 3 this year, but several of the people I love all. I can love them no longer, sadly. So Mass Effect 2 was a pretty big upgrade for me, over Mass Effect 1. The story is a slight downgrade, but everything else is so much better that I think I rated Mass Effect 2 a B+, which is the same as I gave Spider-Man Remastered. So now I have to decide between these two games and talk about what gives the other an edge over it. And I talked about with Spider-Man how the end of the game was really a chore, and that was my own fault for pursuing the platinum trophy. But the side quests were really, even when you're doing the first handful of them, they're filler. They're not very fun. Stopping the cars, breaking up random muggings, none of it's all that creative. It's definitely just, all right, we gotta have some things for this guy to do in this world. What should we throw in, kind of ideas. And they never improve. If anything, they get worse because of the types of people you're fighting. Whereas with Mass Effect 2, I never had to do anything that was a real pain. Like mining the planets is optional, and even that is, it doesn't take that much time. It's more enjoyable and kind of peace. It's almost tranquil. Um, I'd be doing it late at night, right before bed, just to get that last upgrade, and it never really bothered me. Whereas Spider-Man Remastered, I was banging my head against the wall at the very end. And like I said, even when you're doing the first handful, and you don't have to do that many of them, but I'm having to nitpick here, because we got to pick some nits if we're gonna pick between two amazing games. Um, and for me, I have more negative memories of of Spider-Man Remastered than of Mass Effect 2. So we're moving Mass Effect 2 on. It's a really, really good game. I had a blast playing it. Next up, another indie. I guess you could call Astro's Playroom an indie. I'm not sure. The definition is vague these days. Uh, I talked about both these games a lot. They're both short. They're both probably 4 to 5 hours. They both do the thing they're doing really well. But Katana Zero is less of a monument to games and more of an actual game with creative ideas that it's pushing. 3D platformers are a really weird genre for me right now. as far as Astro's Playroom goes. Even one that's done this well and has worlds that are cool and catchy music's playing and nostalgia's blasting in your face constantly. There's only so much you can really do. Like Banjo Kazooie, the first one is still the best 3D platformer I've ever played, and that was on N64. It's hard to do it right, and you know that I think it's the best because of nostalgia, right? Like 3D platformers are just really challenging. Like the new Ratchet and Clanks are good, but I like there's not a story in Astro's Playroom for me to grab onto. Katana Zero randomly has an amazing story as this tiny indie game that's whole thing is about its really cool combat encounters. Oh, by the way, we're just going to chuck in this mysterious story that you're going to be unraveling the whole time and curious what's going on. So for me, this isn't a hard call. It's Katana Zero. I loved Astro's Playroom, but it was less of a game. I'm not looking to play the full version of that game if it ever comes out. I mean, man, we have a freaking gauntlet of Final 8 games here. Mass Effect 2, Spider-Man, Katana, Astros, Hades, Mass Effect 1, Firewatch. I mean, it should be no surprise, right? It's like I said, I didn't play any bad games this year. Like the worst game I played according to my ranks was Final Fantasy VII Remake. Like it's impossible to play bad games right now, especially if you pick them like I do. And you don't have to play all of them for reviews. It's that easy, IGN. All right, Hades versus Mass Effect. Hades didn't even get a real fair fight in Pokemon Sword. It barely even noticed Pokemon Sword was there. Hades' whole job is to beat monsters. That was an unfair fight. Mass Effect versus Hades. Yeah, we're starting to get into a real battle here, but it's not that close. Mass Effect has, like I said, a lot of flaws, and I enjoyed it. It was fun. Hades is almost perfect. It is as close to a perfect indie game as you can get, at least in my opinion. It's not going to be for everyone. I'm not even someone who loves roguelikes. And yet, Hades was all I could think about for a long time. And every time I see someone playing it right now, I'm blown away at how good it is. Oh my God, we're at 47 minutes already. I got to pick up the pace. Hades wins. I don't think particularly close. Mass Effect has too many flaws. I love Mass Effect. It was a fun game. But Hades is like, wow, they are. Supergiant was on it this year. Firewatch, Last of Us Part 2. Another speed bump for Last of Us. Like, we're getting into the part where it's games with flaws, in my opinion, versus games with pretty much no flaws. Last of Us Part 2 romps here. And this shouldn't surprise anyone. Last of Us Part 2 and Hades were pretty much, with a little Ghost of Tsushima mixed in, everyone's Game of the Year picks for this year. And they couldn't be more different. But we'll get to that. We're going back to the top of the bracket for the much stranger matchup of Mass Effect 2 versus Katana Zero. Now, I don't have any flaws to talk about with Katana Zero. The only thing I can go to is it's a much less ambitious project, right? It's tiny. It's 4 or 5 hours. There's not a ton of content. There's not much going on as far as gaming principles while the game develops. There's not much changing as you play the game. It's a story progressing in varying rooms with the exact same controls, exact same abilities, pretty much the whole game. And I'm only saying that that's a downside because I have to find something so that we can have a dialogue here. It's not a downside for me. It was exactly what I was looking for, and it might be getting the benefit of the fact that I played it at the end of the year and I was looking for a quicker game to just, walk into the new year with a perfect palate cleanser behind me, and it did exactly that. Mass Effect 2 is obviously much larger in scope. It has way more going on. It takes more risks thematically, story-wise, everything. But this is a bracket of fun. And while Mass Effect 2 might be more fun to revisit and take a renegade Shepard through the story instead of Paragon, that's a risk, right? You might enjoy it less, you might enjoy it more, and that could be seen as a pro, right? The ability to go back and do something differently. But for me, when I'm reflecting on this last year and like complete experiences, Katana Zero has the slight edge for me. So I think that's going to ruffle some feathers of the 2 to 3 people that watch this and have played all of these games. but it's really close. It really is. I think I gave Mass Effect B plus, but Katana Zero just does everything it does perfectly. And as much as I want to dock it points for not trying enough things, it gets more points for me for doing everything it strives to do perfectly. So here's the real battle: Hades versus Last of Us Part Two. This conversation has been done to death, and I honestly still don't know which one I'm gonna pick. Uh, as I mentioned, they couldn't be more different, right? Let's. I guess I haven't really dove in too far into either of these games because they've been destroying everyone they played against. Hades, I think the only negative I can come up with for it is that the runs and the bosses you run into and the mobs you run into are all samey, and you can get some slight variance by upping the heat level in the later game, but in general, strength of roguelike is having each run feel really, really unique and random, and that you'll never have the same run twice. And I think Hades skirts a little too close to sameness and runs, especially if you're playing with the same weapon over and over again, which sometimes you might be doing if you are trying to unlock a certain achievement or something like that. So that's really nitpicking. Last of Us Part 2, the biggest complaint I have is the pacing of the end of the game. You get to what you think is the end of the game, and there's a whole other segment. And it was kind of a slog to get through because it's a really depressing segment and can kind of be a pain when you just want the game to end. The game isn't a happy game. It takes a lot of work to get through it mentally. And so when you think it's about to end and it might end happily and it doesn't, oh my god. It was hard. It was hard. But I don't want to that's that's part of the journey of that game, and it ended the way it needed to end in my opinion. It had to get where it was going. It just took a little too long. I think 3-4 hours less of gameplay would have really benefited it. So where am I gonna go? How am I gonna pick? um I guess here's where I'm gonna give it the edge. If I was gonna pick up one of these games again in the future, it would be Hades. I have not replayed Last of Us Part 1. I doubt I'll ever play Last of Us Part 2, even though I thought it was perfect when I finished it. While I'm reflecting upon it now, Hades is the game I'm eager to go back to way more than Last of Us Part 2. So that sets us up with a real indie juggernaut final of Hades versus Katana Zero. And this one is kind of like all of the content versus a small, perfect amount of content. And I've talked both of these to death. And I have to decide which one it's going to be. I've been saying this whole time that Katana Zero to me was perfect. It was the perfect experience. It didn't overstay its welcome. But Hades has so much more. It has so much more. They put so much more into the game, and I know hundreds, thousands of people just keep going back because there's so much to do in the game and so many details and so much love put into the game. So I think I'm gonna have to pick Hades. I didn't think that's what I was gonna pick when I started this. Honest to God, I thought I was gonna pick Katana Zero because it really was perfect. I don't think the music in Hades is the strongest of Supergiant's career, but it's just so beautiful. God, I love the art of this game. It's so fun. But that's enough of that. Oh my God, we almost did an hour. So let's jump into the actual fun version of this, which is the Protagonist Deathmatch. I'm going to make this way faster because I spent way too much time talking about video games and because it's easy to get lost talking about them. But I don't know. People are probably going to have way more opinions on this than they did on the game of the year. But that's the fun part, right? That's why I'm doing this, because it's so subjective. One sec. Getting a text from my wife. I need to tell her I want for dinner spicy ramen. All right, first matchup, because I'm going to use the same bracket. I think it's a funny bracket, and we'll get to that. But we have Spider-Man versus Cloud, and when I was preparing for this segment, because I thought it would be fun to do, this is the only fight I was continually going over in my head in depth, because I think it's also the closest of all of the first round matchups. So let's go over some pros and cons. This is such a weird fight to imagine, right? Spider-Man and Cloud. I mean, we're almost there with Super Smash Bros. Maybe someday they'll get rights to Marvel. Doubt it, but um, let's start with Cloud first. So pros, really big fucking sword, and appears to be able to defy gravity. Me and Peter watched Advent Children, or at least the fight scene with Sephiroth in Advent Children, and Cloud was running up falling buildings. It kind of happens in the remake too. Unclear what sort of superpowers he has from becoming a soldier. I think he's like infused with Mako. I don't know. I have and one clarification. These battles are happening in the context of the game that I played these characters in. So if Cloud has some sort of super duper power that gets acquired in another game, that's not part of this. I'm going to describe them exactly as I played them, which is the only fair way to do it, in my opinion. So back to pros for Cloud. I guess can jump really far. I don't know how far. Unclear. Big sword that gives him magical powers of varying elements. He has the limit break, which may or may not let him stop time to do crazy maneuvers. He can summon giant elemental monsters somehow. I don't know, but that's really strong. Cons, when I was playing through the game, at least, if you tried to play it as a single person, you got your ass kicked. You could not do it. He is Cloud is pretty much close combat only. I don't know if you tried to play as Cloud during the Airbuster segment, but I suspect you didn't play as him for very long during the Airbuster segment. Cloud is very susceptible to being dazed and stunned and put to sleep. And if there isn't a buddy laying around to give him a potion or a Phoenix down, he dies kind of easily. He's just a dude with a big sword. And big swords are kind of hard to swing and clunky, and in general, the least elegant thing you could be fighting with. Versus Spider-Man, who's the most agile and nimble person maybe in this entire bracket, master of long range and distance, who is going to be damn near impossible to catch. So really what this comes down to me is, are Cloud's effective superpowers to summon elemental monsters and to maybe not freeze time using his limit break enough to overcome the fact that without those he would 100% get his ass kicked, and I don't think they're enough. I think Spider-Man is too strong, too fast, able to keep his distance and just web up Cloud. I don't think it would last very long, this fight, to be honest. I don't think Cloud's going to be getting in any hits with his big sword unless he has some special moves that I don't know about. But as far as I played the game, the Cloud I played with would not beat Spider-Man. So Spider-Man moves on again. Coming up next, we have the Villager versus Astro. Now, this at first might seem like a reasonable fight. You know, Astro's a cute little bot. He can jump pretty good. He's got a nice little spin move. But if you haven't played Super Smash Brothers, you probably don't know that the Villager is secretly a menacing murderer with lots of tricks up their sleeve. So this one is not all that close. The Villager has an axe. I think that's enough to get them by Astro. And Astro never really demonstrated that they were willing to kill. And I think the Villager has demonstrated that. So another good matchup next. We've got the protagonist from Katana Zero, who at one point or another is known as the Dragon, but then is not. I'm not going to go into it. Versus Geralt, a magic wielding Witcher. And this one's tough. The problem is that the guy from Katana Zero, his whole thing is that he can like rewind and stop time. I don't think that's fair. And I don't think Geralt has much that he can do against it. I will say, all right, both of these characters are basically drug addicts. Geralt, the potions really get him all riled up, and I don't want to spoil Katana Zero, but let's just say the guy gets his powers from a drug, and your therapist administers it. That's not that spoilery. That happens really early on. So Geralt, being as crafty as he is, would probably be aware of this and would probably be able to at least go equal with the protagonist until he entered withdrawal. And then he can't do anything. And he depends on like a substance for his powers. You know what? I've talked myself into it. Geralt's moving on. Geralt has more innate power. And while the protagonist from Katana Zero would be really horrifying at first, once he enters the drug relapse phase of his life, I don't think Geralt's going to be sweating too much. All right, we got another blowout here. Zagreus, the demigod, who can escape the underworld, fighting off horrid, awful monsters, including the god of death himself, Hades, versus some kid with some monsters and some Pokeballs. If there's anything that Zagreus is good at, it's murdering the shit out of some monsters. So not too much of a battle here. Zagreus is going to move on. Sorry, Pokemon Trainer. I know you made it into Super Smash Bros., but Charizard's kind of right in Zagreus' wheelhouse, and there's not much you can do about that. So next up, we have Simon Jarrett of Soma versus Shepard from Mass Effect. I'm going to, for the sake of argument, make Shepard a biotic. So he's going to have some superpowers, basically. And he has a gun. Simon Jarrett, notably, has nothing, ever. He has no powers. He is somehow very wily and capable of living in a horrifying world. I'm very impressed. I would have died if I was in Soma. But he manages to get to the end of the game. So that if he was up against Henry from Firewatch, I think he'd be a heavy favorite. But against a guy with a gun and powers, I wish I could give it to him. I do. I really do. Just because he is resourceful. But he wouldn't be so resourceful if he didn't have his radio girlfriend. Similar to Henry, who is fighting some sort of horrible sword teleporting guy. I don't know that the Hyperlight Drifter protagonist has a name, but he's going to kill Henry regardless of what his name is. And Henry, the only thing Henry has going for him is that he could maybe make the guy feel bad for Henry because Henry's so sad and pathetic and really has made some bad choices in his life. And it's kind of like he could probably get spared, but I don't think he's gonna win. So moving on. Valorant versus Last of Us Part 2 is a little weird. We have to pick a protagonist for each of them. Valorant, I'm going to go with Jet, who is one of the heroes because she's kind of the poster child. She's basically an airbender with knives and a gun, of course. And then Last of Us Part 2, I'm going to rustle some feathers here. I'm picking Abby because I don't want to spoil the game. Let's just say Abby is kind of has the upper hand on Ellie in this game. So Abby versus an airbender. They both have guns. Abby's pretty scrappy, don't get me wrong. She's got some arms to be reckoned with, but Jet can literally fly, basically. That doesn't seem fair, especially when they both have guns. So, not too hard to call there. Moving on, we have Shepard, the sequel, versus Spider-Man. It's Spider-Man, right? Like, guns are cool. Spider-Man's whole thing is basically beating people like Shepard, right? Like, but the whole game you're fighting super powered guys with guns, and that's Shepard's whole thing. So, this is basically like a side mission for Spider-Man. Sorry, Shepard. next up, we have Geralt versus the Villager. The next Smash Bros. Game everyone's looking forward to. It's Geralt, magic wielding Witcher monster slayer versus a tricksy man or female, a tricksy person with some bowling balls and plants. It's Geralt. We're getting into the easy ones here. Again, poor Shepard, man, going up against a superhero and then a god or demigod. Zagreus wins. Sorry, Shep. You've done pretty well as far as game of the year goes, but you're not gonna do so hot in the protagonist battle. All right, next we have Hyperlight Drifter person versus Jet, two sharp object wielding protagonists. I think I have to give it to Hyperlight Drifter person because they dash better. But Jet does have. I mean, they both have guns too. They're weirdly similar if I'm thinking about it. But I think the enemies that the Hyperlight Drifter overcomes is a little more impressive. And Jet kind of sucks. So If we have to, if it's a tie, we're giving it to the Hyperlight Drifter guy. Uh, this is an interesting one: Spider-Man versus Geralt. But maybe it's not that interesting. Geralt's weirdly similar to Cloud, right? Sword wielding, magic obtained fellow fighting like the master of long distance. Not that close, but Geralt's more of like a he's almost Batman, right? Like he's the one who's gonna like plan for whatever his adversary will be and write in his little journal about all Spider-Man's weaknesses. Like maybe he's the one who takes Mary Jane hostage. I'm kind of talking myself into Geralt here. He is kind of Batman, right? Batman, but with actual superpowers. Yeah, I'm going with Geralt. I talk myself into it. Batman always wins, right? Like that's the argument if you're debating superheroes. It's always Batman. Batman's always prepared because Batman has, well, not Batman. Geralt has like generations of notes on all of the enemy types. I'm guessing that Spider-Man in this weird protagonist tournament would have fought a different Witcher at some point, and that Witcher would have scribbled in his notes before Spider-Man killed him or whatever. So I'm giving it to Geralt as the kind of Batman of the tournament. I'm giving it to Geralt. Next up, we have another god. Zagreus is basically just a better version of Hyperlight Drifter guy, right? Like he's got the whole dash thing. He's got the weapons. He's fighting in some horrible world, but also he's the son of Hades. It's Zagreus, right? Zagreus wins. Zagreus was a heavy favorite coming into this tournament, I think. And frankly, God, Zagreus versus Geralt, that's a tough one. I don't really know. Like, Geralt has a weakness and Zagreus doesn't. Like, Zagreus loves his mom. That's kind of a weakness. Geralt loves Ciri, though. That's what makes you weaker, loving your mom or your daughter figure? I don't know. I don't know. Zagreus does have the support of the Olympic gods, though. That's pretty badass. And sometimes he has a gun, like that shoots grenades. I think it's Zagreus. I don't think there's any real debating it. It's got to be Zag, right? Zagreus wins. How can the guy who's capable of escaping the underworld over and over again not defeat everyone, right? Like that's we basically just did the story of Hades. Just keep fighting and dying until we get out of here. Except in this case, we cleared it on our first try. There you got it. My game of the year was Hades, and the protagonist that won the protagonist battle was Hades. Those are two completely unrelated tournaments. Way to go, Super Giant Games. I'm very impressed. So that's gonna wrap it up. I went a little longer than I was planning to for this first episode. The rest of the episodes aren't going to be quite like this. We're not always going to have a year to review, but as I mentioned at the beginning or towards the beginning of the podcast, I'll more be looking to discuss news, notes, games I've been playing, games I've finished, anything going on in the gaming community that I think is worth noting. I'm going to continue to try to bring this positive energy and just love of video games to this, and I really appreciate anyone who is stopping by to watch both this and the reviews that me and Peter are doing. Me and Peter will be putting up another one hopefully by the end of January. He's playing Mega Man Battle Network 3. I'm playing Golden Sun. Games we each loved as children. So that's going to be a fun one. I'm really looking forward to it. And otherwise, I'll be hoping to put up another video in the next week. So thanks so much for watching. This has been Single Player Campaign. I'm Patrick Wren. Until next time.